Hello, you're listening to Rot-Weiss-Rot Report, the podcast for those who live and work in Austria. Each week, we bring you the most important news, concisely and clearly, so you stay informed about the changes that affect your work, your documents, and your everyday life. This week on the show, Austria's government approval rating has plummeted to a record low. 63% of citizens are dissatisfied. What's behind this? And why does it matter, even for those who don't vote? From the 1st of July, prices at supermarkets are supposed to fall. But will they actually drop? Austria is offering Syrian refugees 3,000 euros to return home voluntarily. We break down the details. Ice cream in Austria costs 50% more than in Germany, and it has nothing to do with tariffs. There's a far more revealing system at play behind it. Vienna is creating a registry for the short-term rental platform Airbnb. We explain why and whether it will affect customers. All that and more coming up in just a moment.
Let's begin with the big political picture. 63%. That is the share of Austrians who are dissatisfied with the current government, according to a poll published on the 23rd of June. And this is not merely a poor result. It is an absolute all-time low for this coalition. For context, since March 2025, Austria has been governed by a three-party alliance of ÖVP, SPÖ, and NEOS. The government is led by Chancellor Christian Stocker of the ÖVP. This coalition came together after lengthy and difficult negotiations. Several attempts to form a government had failed before these political forces finally reached an agreement. At the time, in March 2025, it seemed like a lifeline. Today, it looks rather different. The right-wing populist FPÖ, led by Herbert Kickl, consistently polls at 37% across all surveys. That is more than the combined support for ÖVP and SPÖ. Even more alarming is the fact that at current polling levels, the three coalition parties together barely command a parliamentary majority. In other words, a modest swing on election day could hand power to the right, which would fundamentally reshape Austria's immigration policy and make life harder for foreigners through stricter checks, cuts to social benefits, and forced deportations. How did it come to this? The explanation is simple and familiar to anyone living in Austria. The government has been making painful decisions, freezing social payments, cutting expenditures, and meanwhile, the rising cost of living is something everyone feels. FPÖ is capitalizing on all of this, promising to solve every problem swiftly and decisively. Accordingly, their ratings continue to climb. What does this mean for you? Right now, nothing immediate. Elections are scheduled for 2029. But this context explains why certain reforms keep getting delayed, and why the government sometimes appears indecisive. A coalition that is constantly watching its approval ratings is not always capable of making long-term decisions. Instead of strategic reform, the country gets populism and frozen problems.
The next major story from last week is pensions. It sounds dry, but at its core, it's a conversation about how long you'll have to keep working. A serious public debate has erupted in Austria following a German commission's proposal to link the retirement age to average life expectancy. The idea is straightforward. The longer people in a country live on average, the later they automatically retire. The NEOS party and the Industriellen Vereinigung, Austria's main industrial federation, quickly embraced the concept and proposed introducing something similar here. The reaction was swift and unequivocal. SPÖ came out firmly against it, as did the right-wing populists of FPÖ. They were joined by the ÖGB, the Österreichischer Gewerkschaftsbund, the main voice of employed workers. The Social Democrats frame their position like this: the real question is not when people retire, but whether they reach retirement in good health. For now, discussions about pension reform are just that, discussions. No changes are expected anytime soon. But the debate won't go away. The pension question will almost certainly become one of the defining issues of the 2029 election. If you're only beginning to build your career in Austria, this is a signal to start thinking now about additional private savings and not to rely exclusively on the state pension. And while politicians are busy watching poll numbers, a far more immediate threat has emerged, one that intelligence services are actively warning about. It is a network known as 764, operating via Discord and Telegram. These are not terrorists with explosives. This is a group that has been hunting children for years. They target vulnerable teenagers in gaming chat rooms. At first, they pose as regular players or potential friends, just to get the child to let their guard down. Once they've earned trust, the blackmail begins. The child is coerced into sending intimate images, then threatened that these will be shared with everyone they know unless they comply with further demands. Most disturbingly, they forced children to hurt themselves or perform dangerous acts on camera. According to Austrian law enforcement, this is a global network, but in Austria, its activity has recently intensified. That is why we urge you to take this topic seriously and pay close attention to what is happening with your children. If they spend time online, have that conversation now. Ask whether they know anything about this network, who they're talking to in online games, and whether anyone has tried to set them tasks or gain their trust. Don't interrogate them. Simply stay attentive. The key warning sign is secrecy. If a child is being asked to hide their communications with someone online from you, that means the grooming process has already begun, and it's time to intervene immediately. Austrian researcher Nikolaus Stockhammer, who studies the activities of 764, underscores the point. The danger lies in how the network operates like a production line. Its members use psychological pressure techniques previously associated only with recruitment into radical extremist groups. This is why intelligence services currently rate the threat from this network higher than from any other online group. That concludes the top news of the week. In just a moment, we'll continue with an economic update.
So, from the 1st of July, Austria is cutting its VAT, Mehrwertsteuer, on staple food products. The rate drops from 10% to 4.9%. The reduction covers bread, milk, butter, cooking oil, flour, rice, pasta, meat, vegetables, and fruit. In other words, virtually everything you buy most frequently. Naturally, most shoppers are expecting this to be reflected in shelf prices. If the tax rate goes down, it's only logical that prices should follow. But here's where things get interesting. A VAT cut and a price cut on the shelf are not the same thing. The government reduces the tax the retailer pays, but the retailer is under no obligation to pass that saving on to the customer. They can simply pocket the difference. What's more, prepared food doesn't fall under the new rate at all. A shop might lower the price of a plain bread roll, but if it comes with a filling, the price stays the same. Because that's already a prepared dish, not simply a food product. So the real impact on your budget will depend not on the government, but on the pricing strategies of individual retail chains like Billa, Spar, or Hofer. Most analysts currently agree that without strict government monitoring, prices will only fall on promotional items or store brand products, the so-called Eigenmarken. That's where competition between retailers is most intense. So if you want to feel the savings, watch those products after the 1st of July. The major chains tend to cut prices on their own brands first, as a way to draw customers in. Meanwhile, Eurostat has published a new cost of living ranking for EU member states, and Austria's position is far from flattering. The country ranks 8th among the most expensive. Only the wealthy Nordic nations, Ireland and Luxembourg, are ahead. At the same time, Overall inflation in Austria continues to run persistently above the Eurozone average. But the core problem lies in the widening gap between incomes and outgoings. The most acute pressure point is rental housing. Over the past 10 years, rents in Austria have surged by nearly 40%, while real purchasing power of wages over the same period has grown by just 20%. In practical terms, rent is consuming the progress people make through pay increases. If you've recently arrived and find that money runs out fast, despite what seems like a decent salary, these figures explain precisely where it's going. The Austrian economic model long rested on relatively accessible price levels, but that balance has now broken down. Housing and the basic grocery basket have become expenses that outpace income growth. This creates a feeling of financial stagnation, even among those earning above average wages. This very gap, between expectations of the Austrian standard of living and the reality of a monthly budget, has become the central topic of conversation in kitchens and in political circles alike.
And further on the subject of prices, the organization Foodwatch Österreich compared prices on 20 of the most popular ice cream varieties in Austrian and German supermarkets. The result was unexpected. All 20 products were substantially more expensive in Austria, on average by 50%. The record goes to Magnum Mini. A box of 6 in Vienna costs €7.99. In Munich, €4.49. That's a 78% difference. And bear in mind, this is the same product, the same manufacturer, simply a different country. The obvious question arises, what on earth is going on? The answer lies in a system known as territorial supply constraints. Producers such as Unilever and Nestlé effectively prohibit Austrian retailers from sourcing their products at lower prices where they are cheaper, say in Poland or Germany. A distributor in Austria is bound to buy at Austrian prices, which the manufacturer sets separately for each market. It looks absurd, but formally, the practice is permitted within the EU. The European Commission has been criticizing these restrictions for years, yet no systemic change has materialized. The organization Foodwatch is demanding an end to it, but manufacturers effectively protect their monopoly through individual contracts. So if it seems to you that you're paying over the odds for the same goods in Austria compared to your neighbors, you're not imagining it. This is a calculated business model, engineered to keep prices elevated. For business owners, there is important data from KSV 1870, Austria's leading credit agency. In the first quarter of 2026, an average of 20 companies per day went bankrupt in the country. The hardest hit sectors are retail, construction, and food service, together accounting for nearly half of all insolvencies. But one particular figure captures the depth of the crisis. In 41% of cases, companies had less than €4,000 to their name. That is the minimum amount required for a court to even initiate insolvency proceedings. If there's no money, the case is simply closed without any formal process. For creditors, this means getting nothing. The business just vanishes, taking its debts with it. This is the direct consequence of entrepreneurs trading right to the edge until their accounts are completely empty. If you sense that things are getting out of hand and your balances are reaching a critical level, do not wait for the end. Contact the WKO, Wirtschaftskammer Österreich. They can provide expert guidance on whether the business can be saved or whether it's better to wind it down in an orderly fashion while there are still some resources left. In such cases, a timely consultation will cost you far less and serve you far better than the consequences of a complete collapse. And with that, we wrap up the business news and move on to information that is relevant to everyday life in Austria.
Austria has launched a voluntary return program for Syrian refugees. Interior Minister Gerhard Karner of the OVP has announced a new time-limited financial assistance scheme. Syrian nationals who choose to return home of their own accord may receive financial support from the state. The program will run for just 3 months, from July through September inclusive. What exactly is on offer? If a person is still in the asylum application process, holds subsidiären Schutz, subsidiary protection, or is receiving support through the Grundversorgung, meaning basic state welfare, they may receive €3,000 upon voluntary departure. If, however, the individual already holds full refugee status, Asylberechtigte, the payment is lower, at just €1,500. The government's rationale is pragmatic. Voluntary departure costs the state considerably less than a forced deportation, with all its legal proceedings, security arrangements, and charter flights. Since the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime, Austria has already reviewed nearly 13,000 Syrian cases. In at least 4,000 of them, protection status was downgraded or revoked. That said, for now, this is an entirely voluntary program, and Syrian refugees retain the choice to stay or return home. It is not inconceivable that similar schemes could be extended in future to other categories of foreigners. A number of migration experts suggest that if Austria's economic situation deteriorates further, the government may consider offering financial incentives for departure to other groups, including, for instance, Ukrainians whose temporary protection status is due to expire. Whatever the case, if you are considering returning, do not make that decision without legal advice. You can contact Caritas or Diakonia. Both organizations offer assistance free of charge. They will explain the real consequences of relinquishing your status and help you assess the full situation.
For families with children, there is important news from Parliament. Legislators have voted to establish an Unterstützungsfonds, a support fund for single parents. This fund is a lifeline for those raising a child alone when the other parent either does not pay maintenance at all or pays too little. The state has decided to step in and cover the payments in place of the defaulting party, so that you are not left waiting years for money you're owed. €35 million have been allocated for this purpose. This applies to all residents of Austria, so citizenship is not a determining factor here. The parties are still finalizing the details, so keep checking the Familienministerium website to ensure you don't miss the moment when applications open. There is another piece of news that deserves close examination. FPÖ has published the results of a parliamentary inquiry revealing that between 2020 and 2024, nearly €1.9 billion in Kinderbetreuungsgeld, childcare benefit, was paid out in Austria to individuals without Austrian citizenship. FPÖ representatives have seized on this as grounds to demand that these payments be restricted to Austrian citizens only. This is political news that generates a great deal of noise, but it is important to distinguish populism from your actual rights. This money is not a gift, nor is it charity. These are payments directly tied to your employment and contributions to the social insurance system. If you are working legally and paying your social contributions every month, you have exactly the same entitlement to this benefit as any Austrian citizen. Both Austrian and European law guarantee this. The same applies to the monthly child benefit, Familienbeihilfe. There is no reason to be alarmed, and no reason to let loud political statements mislead you. And finally, a piece of news that affects not only migrants, but will be particularly useful if you enjoy online shopping. A reminder that returning goods to online retailers has just become significantly easier. Across the entire European Union, a new requirement has come into force regarding a so-called cancellation button. This means that any online shop or platform must place a clearly visible button on its website or app, which, once clicked, automatically initiates the returns process. You no longer need to hunt for complicated forms or write lengthy explanations. After clicking, you simply receive a confirmation to your email, and your right to return a purchase within 14 days remains unchanged. That said, bear in mind that Austria is still adapting its domestic legislation to this directive, so not all retailers have updated their interfaces immediately. If you notice that a shop is ignoring the new requirements or burying its returns policy deep in small print, you have every right to contact the Arbeiterkammer. This organization stands firmly on the side of the consumer and will help you navigate your specific situation professionally, ensuring the retailer meets its obligations and accepts the return under the new rules. That concludes the main news concerning the rights and daily life of migrants in Austria this week. Up next, we turn to the news from Vienna.
Let's begin with a story that matters to everyone looking for housing or already renting. Vienna's Mayor Michael Ludwig of the SPO has announced new measures targeting property speculation through platforms like Airbnb and Booking. The central idea is a mandatory registry for all those who let their properties to tourists. After registration, every landlord receives a unique number, which must appear in every online listing. Without that number, it's illegal. Since summer 2024, Vienna has had a restriction in place. Residential properties may only be rented to tourists for a maximum of 90 days per year. But without a registration system, enforcing this has been virtually impossible. According to estimates from the Arbeiterkammer Wien, around 14,000 apartments in the city are currently listed on Airbnb, and a significant proportion of these are skirting the boundaries of the law. The new registry, whose details Ludwig is still finalizing with NEOS, is intended to make enforcement a reality. No specific date has been set yet, but the mayor has promised it will happen very soon. If you let your property through Airbnb, stay on top of the news. If you're looking to rent, these measures, over time, should help return some apartments to the regular housing market. Meanwhile, the Vienna Public Prosecutor's Office is investigating a series of suspicious deaths at a city clinic. It began when colleagues noticed a disturbing pattern. Patients in the emergency ward were dying with unusual frequency during the night shifts of one particular staff member. The personnel raised the alarm with hospital management, and the case was subsequently passed to law enforcement. Investigators suspect the man may have been intentionally administering fatal doses of pain medication to patients. The employee himself denies any involvement. Despite the gravity of the allegations, he remains free. The prosecutor's office explains that at this stage, there is insufficient direct evidence for an immediate arrest. The investigation is ongoing, and forensic experts are now working to establish or rule out a connection between the employee's actions and each individual death. This is a case that has already shocked Vienna's medical community, and we will continue to follow its developments. Meanwhile, the life of the city goes on, though getting around Vienna over the coming months will require patience. Brace yourselves for major construction works. From the 4th of July to the 6th of September, a section of the S-Bahn between Platterstern and Floridsdorf will be closed, and from the 7th of September through to the end of next year, the stretch between the Hauptbahnhof and Platterstern will be undergoing upgrades. ÖBB is investing €1 billion in track renewal, so more transfers will be unavoidable in the near future. On top of that, from the 3rd of July until early August, the U4 metro line will be closed between Schwedenplatz and Landstrasse, while switches are being replaced. Use the U1, U2, or U3 lines as alternatives, and be sure to check your route in the Wiener Linien app right before you set off. And finally, an unusual story. A kebab kiosk in Vienna has been put up for sale. The asking price? €330,000. If you thought you misheard, you didn't. $330,000 for a kiosk. The owner's explanation is that this is not just any kiosk. It's an established business with a loyal customer base and a prime location. They may well have a point, but this price is yet another telling signal of how much it costs to secure a foothold in the capital's marketplace. And on that note, we wrap up the Vienna news. And next, a brief look at what happened last week across the various federal states.
We begin in Carinthia, where activists painted the shopfront of a well-known confectionery in Klagenfurt and plastered it with posters protesting the fact that the owner has for years been selling chocolate under the name Neger. This word in German is a direct equivalent of a racial slur. The proprietor has categorically refused to change the name, insisting on its traditional character. But for the majority of Austrians, the term has long been considered unacceptable. Police have opened a case for property damage, though the story took an unexpected turn. The confectionery owner released a limited edition chocolate line with the ironic label Left-Wing Extremist Edition, and demand for it proved enormous. The situation was sharply condemned by Klagenfurt's deputy mayor, who called the activists' actions an attack on a business. Meanwhile, in Upper Austria, the prosecutor's office is examining at least 4 cases in which individuals obtained Austrian citizenship illegally, through forged documents and, potentially, bribery. Why does this matter? Because Austrian citizenship is a goal around which fraudsters invariably circulate. If you, or anyone you know, is being offered an easier or faster path to citizenship in exchange for money, that is almost certainly a scam. The lawful route is clearly defined, and there are no shortcuts. The second story from Upper Austria concerns a 70-year-old woman from the town of Attersee am Attersee. She was detained after being involved in a minor road accident. When asked to produce her documents, it emerged she had no driving license and hadn't had one for 50 years. In other words, she had been driving without a license for half of her adult life. A breathalyzer test showed over 5 per ml of alcohol, at a level where anything above 4 is considered dangerous. She refused a medical examination, which under Austrian law is automatically treated as an admission of the offense. This is a reminder that driving in Austria without the appropriate license is extraordinarily risky. The fines are substantial, and the criminal liability is real. If your foreign license needs to be converted, take care of it. After officially registering your place of residence, you have 6 months during which you may drive using your Meldezettel. After that period, the license must be exchanged. In Lower Austria, the bodies of 3 young men were discovered in the Machfeld Canal near Gerasdorf in the district of Korneuburg. All 3 were visitors from Vienna who had set out to ride SUP boards and went missing. The search operation lasted nearly 24 hours and involved a drone and a police aviation helicopter. On Thursday morning, the bodies were spotted from the air, and divers retrieved them from the water. According to the preliminary investigation, the tragedy occurred near the 3rd weir on the canal, the so-called Wehranlage. The men apparently attempted to ride through the hydraulic structure, were caught in the reverse current, and were unable to swim free. This is something everyone who spends time on the water should know. The Machfeld Canal looks calm, but it is far more dangerous than a natural river. Weirs create a closed reverse current from which even strong swimmers can rarely escape. The rule is simple. If there is a hydraulic structure on your route, get out of the water and carry your SUP board or canoe around it on the bank. It could save your life. And if extreme outdoor pursuits are not your thing, also in Lower Austria, the Theaterfest Niederösterreich 2026 has just launched. The festival runs until the end of August. Performances take place at dozens of extraordinary venues, medieval castles, monasteries, and open-air stages set amid nature. This is one of the most captivating cultural formats the region has to offer. Tickets and the full program are available on the festival's official website.
And that brings us to the end of this week's news review. A reminder that Austria is still in the grip of a heat wave that is taking its toll on people and infrastructure alike. Doctors are strongly urging everyone to drink more water, avoid direct sunlight between 11 in the morning and 5 in the evening, and pay close attention to how you're feeling. Take care of yourselves. Do not leave children or animals in closed vehicles, even for a few minutes, and remember the public drinking fountains that are now proving a genuine lifesaver. We will keep you informed of the most important developments. Subscribe to the weekly podcast Rot-Weiss-Rot REPORT, the podcast for those who live and work in Austria. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify. That's all from us. Until next week.